The storm rolled in like a living thing, violent, cold, and relentless. Thunder cracked across the darkened skies of Nova Scotia, sending tremors through the tall pines that bordered the remote veterinary clinic run by Dr. Henry Caldwell. It was late, nearly 9 p.m., and the last light inside the clinic flickered against the rain-streaked windows as Henry wiped down his surgical tools from the day's final procedure. Outside, wind howled, pelting the porch roof with sheets of rain. Henry, an older man with calm eyes and a steady hand, moved to lock up for the night when a sharp, desperate scratching erupted at the front door. Not the kind of soft, nervous scratch he'd expect from a stray. This was urgent, forceful, demanding. Frowning, Henry turned on the porch light and opened the door cautiously. What he saw made him freeze. There, standing in the glare of the porch bulb, was a border collie, soaked to the bone, her black and white coat clinging to her trembling body. Her name was Maggie, and Henry recognized her instantly. She belonged to the Thompson family, who lived on a farm just beyond the Eastern Ridge. 2 weeks ago, Maggie had given birth to a litter of 6 healthy puppies right in this very clinic. Now, her eyes were hollow with something Henry couldn't yet name, but it wasn't just exhaustion. Between her jaws, Maggie gently held a tiny, unmoving creature. "Maggie?" Henry stepped forward. "What in the world?" She didn't growl or bark. Instead, she carefully patted inside, dripping water across the linoleum floor, and laid the small bundle down with delicate precision. Then she backed away slightly, but kept her body between Henry and the creature, her eyes locked on his. Henry crouched low, his voice soft. "Easy, girl. Let me help." It was a lynx kitten, so young it barely had its eyes open. Its tiny ribs showed through its wet, spotted fur, and it shivered uncontrollably. No older than 3 weeks, by Henry's estimation. He reached for a towel, moving slowly. Maggie didn't budge, but her muscles tensed. She didn't want him to touch it. "I just want to help, sweetheart," he whispered. He approached again, showing her the towel in his hands, his voice steady and low. Finally, Maggie seemed to understand. She stepped aside just enough for him to wrap the lynx in the towel and lift it onto the exam table under the bright lights. The kitten let out a faint, hoarse cry. Maggie whimpered in response and took a step forward, ears pinned, eyes wide. She was distressed, deeply. Henry glanced between them, stunned by the emotion in the dog's face. This wasn't just an act of kindness. There was a bond forming here, and he didn't yet understand it. The kitten was hypothermic, malnourished, and dehydrated, but otherwise uninjured. Henry had treated wild animals before, but this was different. A lynx this young without a mother didn't survive in the wild for long, unless someone, or something, intervened. He turned away for a moment to warm a formula bottle designed for wild feline neonates, but when he turned back, he stopped cold. Maggie, who had never, in any of her previous visits, dared jump on a table, had climbed onto the exam surface, curled her body around the lynx kitten, and pulled it close. Her chest rose and fell in deep, rhythmic breaths as the kitten found her nipples and began to nurse. Henry set the bottle down in disbelief. His mind raced. A domestic dog had just adopted a wild lynx kitten. "Impossible," he murmured, watching the scene unfold. He'd heard of unusual nursing behavior before, but never across such biologically opposed species. This wasn't about instincts alone. This was emotional, intentional. He stepped away from the table and grabbed the Thompsons' contact number from the records. He dialed. The voice on the other end was hoarse with fatigue. "Hello? Tom, it's Henry Caldwell. I think I've found Maggie." A long pause. "Thank God," Tom said. "We've been looking for her for 2 days. Is she okay?" Mostly fine, but there's something unusual. I think you and Ella should come here. Now." 20 minutes later, Tom and his 10-year-old daughter, Ella, rushed through the clinic doors. Their clothes were soaked, their faces drawn with worry. "Maggie!" Ella cried out. "Wait," Henry cautioned. "Come slowly." He led them to the exam room. Maggie remained motionless on the table, curled protectively around the lynx kitten. Both Tom and Ella froze in shock. "What is that?" Tom asked. "A lynx kitten. About 3 weeks old," Henry said. "Maggie brought her here." "But how?" Ella's voice cracked. "Where are her puppies?" Henry glanced at Tom. The man's shoulders slumped as he sat heavily into a chair. His voice was gravel. "There was a flash flooding from the storm 2 nights ago. The shed where Maggie stayed with her pups filled with water. We got back too late." "Maggie tried to save them," Ella added, her voice trembling. "She carried them in her mouth, one by one. But they didn't make it." Henry's heart ached. "She stopped eating, wouldn't even look at food, just stared at the basket where they'd been." Tom nodded. "Then she disappeared." Henry knelt beside the table and looked Maggie in the eyes. "She didn't give up. She went looking for something, or someone, to care for." "And she found Luna," Ella whispered, as if giving the lynx her name in that moment. Henry smiled faintly. "Yes, she found Luna." He stood and watched as the two creatures, so different in nature, yet bound by shared loss, curled closer together under the sterile light of the clinic. And in that quiet moment, something shifted. What had begun as tragedy had transformed into something rare, something healing. A new story had just begun. Morning light filtered through the slatted blinds of Dr. Henry Caldwell's clinic, casting soft shadows on the linoleum floor. The storm had passed, leaving behind crisp air and an eerie stillness. Inside the main exam room, Maggie lay on a thick blanket, curled protectively around Luna, the lynx kitten she had adopted as her own. Henry had barely slept. He'd brought out a folding cot and spent the night in his office, half awake, ears tuned to every rustle and whimper from the next room. But what he heard instead was something remarkable. Silence. The kind that only came when a newborn was safe and comforted. He tiptoed into the room with a bowl of warm food. Maggie lifted her head, ears alert. It was the first time she'd responded to him since she arrived. Her dark eyes followed him, and when he set the bowl down, she slowly rose, stretched, and, to his quiet relief, began to eat. It was a turning point. After days of grief, Maggie was choosing to live again. Henry crouched beside her, watching as Luna, still weak but visibly stronger, snuggled into the warm spot Maggie had just vacated. He scribbled notes in his logbook. Day 2. Maggie is producing milk. Appetite returning. Emotional bond with lynx kitten intensifying. Will observe closely. He didn't know it yet, but the strange family that had begun with loss and rain was about to grow even more unusual. 3 days later, Ella burst through the clinic doors, panting, her blonde braid swinging behind her. "Doctor! Henry! Dad! There's another dog behind the school, with puppies!" Henry didn't hesitate. Grabbing his medical bag, he followed Ella and Tom in the truck to the small elementary school at the edge of town. The schoolyard was quiet. Behind an old maintenance shed, nestled under a discarded awning, was a thin, trembling Labrador mix with 3 small puppies huddled against her belly. The mother dog was emaciated, ribs clearly visible beneath her short, dusty coat. Her eyes fluttered open at their approach, but she couldn't lift her head. One paw shifted as if she meant to stand, to protect her young, but her strength failed her. The puppies, barely 3 weeks old, whimpered weakly, their tiny bodies pressing into her side for warmth. Ella se arrodilló, lágrimas brotando en sus ojos. We fed them scraps yesterday, but today she wouldn't eat. Henry placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You did the right thing by coming back. With Tom's help, they lifted the mother and her puppies into the back of the truck and returned to the clinic. Henry moved quickly. Fluids for the mother, careful examinations for the pups. Thankfully, none were seriously injured, just malnourished and exhausted. Her name is Sophie, Ella said, giving the mother dog a name as she stroked her head. She looks like she needs someone to believe in her. Back at the clinic, Henry faced a delicate decision. How would Maggie react to newcomers? Maggie had created a protective bubble around Luna, one forged in loss and instinct. Introducing another mother and her litter could unsettle everything. But they couldn't remain separate forever. Henry set up a low safety barrier between the two recovery areas, enough for visibility and scent exchange, but no direct contact. Then he brought Sophie and her pups into the adjacent pen. Maggie's ears perked immediately. She stood, tail stiff, her body forming a subtle wall between Luna and the sounds on the other side of the barrier. Luna, curious, peeked between Maggie's legs, ears twitching. On the other side, Sophie lifted her head weakly. One of her pups, the runt, a tiny beige male Ella named Teddy, wobbled toward the barrier. What happened next stunned everyone. Luna, still shy but bolder by the day, stepped forward. The lynx kitten and the small puppy met at the barrier, noses almost touching. Maggie watched, tense but not aggressive. Then, with deliberate calm, she stepped closer and sniffed Teddy. No growl, no warning bark, just a long, deep breath, as if she were saying, I know you. I understand your loss too. Henry exhaled the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Over the next few days, something even more extraordinary unfolded. Maggie began paying attention not just to Luna, but to Teddy. When Sophie rested, Maggie would cross the barrier and lie beside the small pup, licking his head gently, tucking him beneath her chin. Sophie didn't object. In her fatigue, perhaps she understood that another mother's help was not a threat, but a gift. And so this strange blended family took shape. Maggie, the border collie who had lost her own. Luna, the wild orphan raised by love, not species. Sophie, the stray given a second chance. And Teddy, the fragile pup who now had two mothers. Henry documented every interaction. He took photos, recorded feeding behaviors, made note of body language and hormonal signs. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just science. It was something more. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the clinic bathed in amber light, Henry stood at the doorway, watching. Maggie lay stretched out across the floor, her tail thumping gently. Luna and Teddy curled side by side against her belly, fast asleep. Sophie dozed nearby, her two other puppies tucked against her. A family, not formed by nature or blood, but by something deeper, by need, by instinct, by heart. Tom stood beside Henry, arms crossed, eyes glassy. I thought we lost Maggie for good, he said quietly. But she just needed someone else to live for. Henry nodded. Sometimes the ones most broken end up being the glue that holds others together. They watched in silence as the clinic filled with the sounds of soft breathing, tiny yawns, and the steady rhythm of healing hearts. And in the center of it all was Maggie, mother to the wild and the weak, the orphaned and the abandoned. A new kind of family. By the second week, the clinic no longer felt like a sterile place for sick animals. It felt like a nursery. The quiet hum of machinery, once cold and clinical, now mingled with the occasional yips of puppies, the gentle purring growls of a young lynx, and the soft rustle of fur against blankets. Dr. Henry Caldwell had transformed the back room into a warm and safe haven. Soft mats lined the floor, baby gates divided corners, and a sunlit window offered just enough view of the world outside. But what truly made the space extraordinary wasn't what it looked like. It was what was happening inside it. Maggie had fully stepped into her new role, not just as Luna's adoptive mother, but as a quiet, guiding force for every vulnerable creature around her. Her energy had shifted. Where there had once been grief and exhaustion, there was now a calm confidence. She rose early, cleaned Luna gently after feeding, nuzzled Teddy, the smallest puppy, whenever he cried out. Even when Henry moved between the animals to administer treatments or food, Maggie seemed to watch him not as a stranger, but as a trusted assistant. "She's supervising you," Tom Thompson joked one morning, leaning against the doorway while sipping his coffee. Henry smiled, scribbling notes. "That's fine by me. I've worked with worse bosses." Luna had grown fast. Her fur, once patchy and wet, was now plush and richly spotted. Her ear tufts had emerged, black tips twitching with every noise. She climbed low shelves with ease, pounced at shadows, and swatted playfully at Maggie's tail. But something deeper was happening, something that fascinated Henry most. Luna was learning how to behave like a dog, and like a bobcat. Every lesson Maggie once taught her puppies, she now gave to Luna. A low woof meant danger. A soft nudge meant move away from the edge. A single bark while feeding meant wait your turn. Amazingly, Luna responded. She didn't just understand, she adapted. One afternoon, Henry watched from the observation window as Maggie sat in the middle of the padded room, her tail curled neatly over her paws. Luna crouched low in front of her, muscles coiled. And then, a perfect pounce. Not playful, not clumsy. It was the silent, precise movement of a hunter. Luna tackled a soft toy with grace beyond her weeks. Henry blinked. That wasn't something Maggie taught her. That was instinct. But Maggie didn't reprimand her. Instead, she let Luna stalk again. Let her run. Then, when it was time to settle, Maggie nuzzled the kitten back to her side, calming her from the thrill of the hunt. It was a balance of wildness and nurture, and Maggie walked the line with grace. Meanwhile, Sophie, the Labrador mother, had regained strength. Her ribs were no longer visible. Her fur had begun to shine again. She wagged her tail more often. Even the fear in her eyes had dulled to a wary curiosity. But the true turning point came one morning when Sophie stood up and nudged one of her puppies away from Maggie's side, gently but firmly reclaiming her role as mother. Maggie didn't resist. She simply stepped back and watched. It was a subtle moment, but Henry caught it. Two mothers, one who had lost everything, one who had been rescued from collapse, co-parenting with unspoken trust. And in the middle of it all, Teddy flourished. He followed Maggie everywhere, mimicked the way she stretched, the way she growled softly when unsure, even the way she tilted her head at strange sounds. But he also played with Luna, chasing her tail, tugging her ear, sharing the same bed at night. It was the most unusual sibling bond Henry had ever seen. By the fourth week, Henry decided to expand the boundaries. He had the Thompsons build a secure outdoor enclosure behind the clinic, fenced, shaded, with space to climb and run. The first time the animals were released outside together, it was like watching a family arrive at a playground. Luna raced to the nearest tree trunk and scrambled halfway up before tumbling backward in surprise. Teddy tried to follow, managing only a clumsy bounce into a pile of leaves. Sophie and Maggie trotted side by side around the perimeter, sniffing every corner, tails held high. That afternoon, Ella sat cross-legged in the grass, watching Luna bat at a falling leaf. "Do you think she knows she's different?" she asked Henry. "I think," Henry said, watching the lynx kitten stalk her way toward Teddy. She knows exactly who she is, and I think she also knows she belongs here. That night, Henry recorded his observations. The dynamics between Maggie, Sophie, Luna, and the puppies continue to evolve. Luna is exhibiting both wild and social behaviors, sleeping in packs, responding to canine cues, yet still stalking independently. Teddy and Luna's bond is unique. They mirror each other. They learn from each other. Maggie is thriving. Sophie, too. We are no longer observing recovery. We are observing transformation. As the sun set over the Nova Scotian pines and the clinic lights blinked on for the evening, Henry sat on the back steps with a cup of tea in his hands. Maggie lay near the fence, watching as Luna and Teddy wrestled over a twig. Sophie dozed nearby, her other two pups curled beside her. It wasn't natural by textbook definitions, but it was love. Wild, resilient, rewritten. And in that moment, Henry realized, this wasn't just a temporary arrangement. It was a family, forged not by blood, but by survival, and by choice. By the gate, nose pointed toward the tree line, watching. When Luna returned near dusk, muddy paws and wild light in her eyes, Maggie approached slowly. There was no scolding, no dramatic reunion, just a quiet sniff, a lick on the head, acceptance. The family adjusted. Maggie became more involved with Teddy and his brothers again. Sophie, now fully recovered, had become Henry's shadow, following him on his morning rounds, tail wagging, ears alert. But even as normalcy returned, everyone could feel it. The time was coming. The time for goodbye. On a crisp morning, under a golden sky, Darren arrived with a soft crate and a backpack. "Today's the day," he said. Henry had already packed Luna's favorite blanket. Ella brought the feather toy she loved. Tom handed over a GPS tracker and nodded with a heavy heart. Maggie didn't resist when Luna was gently guided into the crate, but she followed, all the way to the truck, her tail low, her eyes steady. "She can come with us," Darren offered, "just for this part." Henry nodded. "She deserves that much." At the release site, the forest was quiet, ancient and vast. Pines whispered above. The scent of moss and bark filled the air. Darren opened the crate. Luna stepped out slowly, her body low, ears scanning. She didn't run. She looked back, straight at Maggie. The old dog stood still, no leash, no command, just presence. Luna patted over and pressed her forehead against Maggie's chest. A gesture, a thank you, a goodbye. Maggie licked her once, then stepped back, and Luna, lynx, daughter, survivor, turned toward the trees and vanished into the wild she was born for. No sound, no whine, just wind, and a memory. They drove home in silence. Maggie didn't whimper, didn't pace. Instead, when they arrived, she walked straight to the back field, lay in the sun, and closed her eyes. Teddy curled beside her, confused but calm. Life had shifted again, and Maggie, once again, was choosing to keep living. Weeks passed, then months. The leaves turned gold, then fell. Snow came and blanketed the Thompson farm in soft silence. Life moved on. But some things, some bonds, do not fade. Maggie still woke early each day, stretching on the porch before trotting toward the outdoor enclosure behind the clinic. There, she did what she always did, checked every corner, sniffed the wind, counted her family. Teddy, now almost full-grown, followed closely behind her. He was taller than before, leaner too, but still had that slight clumsy bounce in his steps. Where Maggie went, he followed. And at night, when the other puppies curled beside their mother Sophie, Teddy always found Maggie, his chosen mother. They were inseparable. Sometimes, in the still hours after sundown, Maggie would stand quietly by the fence, nose pointed toward the trees. Her ears twitched at sounds no human could hear. Her body would lean forward slightly, as if hoping to catch the faintest scent. And then, just as gently, she'd lie down, eyes open, waiting. Dr. Henry Caldwell continued his visits. The clinic had returned to routine operations, but Maggie's story had become legendary, a case study in both veterinary journals and news outlets. People came from across the province to ask about the dog who raised a lynx. But fame didn't change Henry, nor Maggie. Their rhythms stayed simple, peaceful, meaningful. And then, on a clear spring night, something changed. It was Ella who saw it first. She was sitting on the porch with her father, sipping cocoa under a star-scattered sky, when she gasped and pointed. "Dad, look!" At the edge of the woods, silhouetted by moonlight, stood a shape, slender, wild, and watching. Two golden eyes blinked in the darkness. It was Luna. She didn't come closer. She didn't need to. Maggie stood from the grass, ears perked. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, predator and protector, wild and domestic, mother and daughter. Then Luna gave a low, almost inaudible trill, a lynx's greeting. Maggie answered with a soft huff, and just like that, Luna turned and melted back into the trees. Gone again, but not lost, never lost. Over the weeks that followed, signs began to appear. Fresh paw prints near the chicken coop, but no harm done. Tiny piles of leaves rearranged by the fence. A rabbit carcass, untouched, left neatly near the barn. "She's leaving us gifts," Ella whispered one morning, fingers pressed to her lips. "She remembers." And Maggie, she always knew. Whenever Luna was close, Maggie would lift her head, tail flicking just once, then return to whatever she was doing, as if to say, "She's okay. That's all I need." Meanwhile, life on the farm bloomed. Sophie's other puppies had grown into rambunctious teenagers, full of energy and mischief. Tom built a larger shelter near the barn for the whole pack, with a covered porch just for Maggie, who still preferred a quiet corner. Henry visited often, always greeted by a thump of Maggie's tail and Teddy's leaping bark. He continued documenting the unique behavior patterns, especially the way Teddy mimicked Luna's stalking moves, slinking through tall grass with uncanny silence. "He's got a little lynx in him," Henry chuckled once. "You raised him well, Maggie." She only blinked and yawned. One sunny afternoon, Henry brought a photographer to the farm. They captured images for an article titled, "The Dog Who Healed Through Love." A story not about science, but about hearts that chose not to break. The cover photo was perfect. Maggie lying in the grass, her head resting gently across Teddy's back. Behind her, Sophie watched with soft eyes, and just beyond the fence, barely visible but unmistakable, a lynx-shaped shadow peered through the trees. Luna. Years later, long after Luna had fully returned to the wild, people still told Maggie's story. They told it to children who asked if love could cross species. They told it to grieving families who had lost everything. They told it to strangers who needed hope. Because it wasn't just a story of a dog and a lynx. It was a story of loss, of grief, of choosing to keep living anyway, of healing by giving, and becoming whole through the act of caring for another. On Maggie's final day, she lay in the sunlight with Teddy curled beside her. Her breaths were slower now, but peaceful. She didn't whine. She didn't struggle. Henry knelt down, stroking her head. "You did good, girl," he whispered. "You gave more than anyone expected." Tom and Ella sat close by, silent, respectful. Even Sophie lay nearby, unusually still. And just before the sun dipped behind the hills, a rustle came from the woods. No one spoke. No one moved, but every heart on that farm felt it. She was there. Luna, watching, saying goodbye. Henry later wrote in his final logbook entry, "Maggie taught us that grief is not an ending. She reminded us that love is not limited by biology or expectation. She showed us that even in the most unlikely pairing, healing is possible." Maggie raised a wild heart, and in return, she found her own again. The wild remembers, so does the heart. And in one small corner of Nova Scotia, both still whisper to each other through the wind in the tree,